Choi Seung-min wasn't a man who asked for respect. He carved it out. He was the ink demon of the Jindal Syndicate, a lethal enigma whose neck tattoos were a warning sign that terrified the Seoul underworld. But his greatest fear wasn't the police or the traitors within his ranks. It was the 2-year-old girl in the blue dress who sat frozen beside him and never made a sound. The doctors called Min Seo's condition trauma-induced mutism, following the ambush that took her mother. Seung-min called it his living purgatory. That silence had been a heavy shroud for 12 agonizing months, until a quiet evening at the Crimson Lotus when the most feared man in the city felt the ground beneath him shatter. The silence didn't just break, it exploded, and not for him. Min Seo reached a tiny, desperate hand toward a trembling African-American waitress who had no idea she was serving the most dangerous table in the city, or that her life was about to become collateral damage. "Mama," the little girl called out. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comment and also click on the subscribe button. Now let's go back to the story." The heavy steel door of the restaurant's manager's office slammed shut, instantly silencing the chaos of the dining room. Ruth stumbled as she was shoved toward a lone wooden chair in the center of the room. The space smelled of stale cigar smoke and lemon polish, a nauseating mix that made her head spin. She gripped the edges of the seat, her knuckles turning white. Across from her, Choi Seung-min leaned against the mahogany desk. Up close, the ink demon was terrifying. The tattoos climbing his neck seemed to writhe under the harsh fluorescent light, and his eyes were void of any warmth. He wasn't looking at her like a person. He was looking at her like a puzzle he was about to break apart to solve. "Who sent you?" His voice was low, a velvet threat that vibrated in the small room. "Nobody," Ruth stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. I don't know what happened out there. I'm sorry if I upset the little girl. Please, I just want to keep my job." Seung-min pushed off the desk, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. He slammed a hand onto the back of her chair, leaning down until she could smell the faint, sharp scent of expensive whiskey and gunpowder. "My daughter has not spoken a single word in 365 days, he hissed, his face inches from hers. "She screams for no one, yet today she looks at a stranger and calls for her mother. You are going to tell me why, or you will never walk out of this door." Tears pricked Ruth's eyes. "I don't know, I swear, I've never seen her before." "Do you have children?" "No." "A husband, a past life in Seoul?" "No, I've never left Chicago," Ruth cried out, trembling. "I'm nobody, I have no family, I couldn't even start one if I wanted to." Seung-min paused, his eyes narrowing. "Explain." Ruth swallowed hard, the shame of her past bubbling up under the pressure. "Years ago, when my father got sick, I needed money. I went to a clinic, the Elysium Center. I donated eggs." She looked down, her voice breaking. "They told me the batch wasn't viable. They said they were all discarded. I have no children, I never have." The silence that followed was suffocating. Seung-min didn't move. He stared at her, his mind racing, calculating. Suddenly, the door clicked open. A man in a gray suit stepped in, holding a tablet with a trembling hand. He didn't look at Ruth. He looked only at Seung-min. "Boss," the man whispered, urgent fear in his tone. "The rapid sample from the glass she drank from, and the hair from Min Seo's brush. The markers align." Seung-min snatched the tablet. He scanned the data, his jaw tightening until a muscle feathered in his cheek. The clinic hadn't discarded anything. They had lied to the donor, sold the biological material to the highest bidder, him, and pocketed the difference. He looked up from the screen, his gaze landing on Ruth with a terrifying new intensity. She wasn't an assassin. She wasn't a stranger. "They didn't fail," Seung-min said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "They sold you." The elevator doors slid open with a hush, revealing a sprawling penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum of glass and steel. Seoul glittered hundreds of feet below, a cold ocean of electric light, but inside, the air was still and pressurized. Ruth hugged her cheap cardigan tighter around herself, stepping onto the polished marble floor. Seung-min walked ahead, tossing his suit jacket onto a leather sofa worth more than her father's life insurance policy. The movement caused the shirt to pull tight against his back, hinting at the violence etched into his skin beneath the white cotton. "My team has already run your financials," he said, not bothering to turn around. "Student loans, credit card debt, and the outstanding hospice care bills for your late father. You are drowning, Ms. Landa." Ruth stiffened, indignation flaring through her fear. "That's private." "Nothing is private," he countered, turning to face her. The city lights cast long shadows across his tattooed neck. "You need money, I need peace. My daughter. She has chosen you. I don't believe in fate, but I believe in results. If you can calm her, you have a place here." "You want me to be a babysitter?" "I want you to be a distinct presence, a live-in maid, a nanny, whatever title helps you sleep at night." He slid a folded check across the black granite island. "This clears your debts, all of them, plus a salary that ensures you never worry about rent again." Ruth looked at the check. The number was staggering. It was freedom. But looking at the cold gun resting on the side table, she knew it was also a shackle. "I can't," she whispered, backing away. "I'm not part of this world. I serve tables. I don't live with people like you." "Then walk away," Seung-min challenged, his voice devoid of emotion. "The elevator is right there." Ruth turned, her hand reaching for the call button. But then a soft, choked sound stopped her. She looked down the hallway. Standing in the doorway of a darkened room was Min Seo. The toddler was clutching a velvet rabbit by the ear, her face wet with silent tears. Her small chest heaved with the effort of suppressed sobs, her eyes wide and pleading as they locked onto Ruth. She didn't scream this time. She just reached out a trembling hand, her fingers opening and closing in a desperate, grasping motion. The grief in the child's eyes mirrored the hollow ache Ruth had carried since the clinic lied to her years ago. It was a magnetic pull she couldn't fight. The biology she had been told didn't exist was now standing 10 feet away, begging to be held. Ruth's hand dropped from the elevator button. She looked back at Seung-min, who was watching the exchange with a calculated stillness. "I stay," she said, her voice shaking but resolute, "but only for her." Seung-min nodded once, a predator accepting a surrender. "Welcome home, Ruth." The penthouse was a masterclass in intimidation, a labyrinth of slate-gray corridors and vaulted ceilings that echoed with every footstep. For 3 days, Ruth had moved through the space like a trespasser, painfully aware of the silent, judging eyes of the household staff. They were efficient and invisible, ghosts in uniforms who vanished whenever she turned ahead, leaving her isolated in the sprawling luxury. She was carrying a tray of warm milk down the east wing when a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was Junho. Seung-min's lieutenant was a lean, sharp-featured man who wore his suit like armor. He didn't step aside to let her pass. Instead, he stood dead center in the hallway, forcing her to stop abruptly. His eyes raked over her simple maid's uniform with undisguised revulsion, lingering on her face with a sneer that needed no translation. "You think a new dress changes what you are?" Junho said, his English heavily accented and dripping with venom. "You are a stain on this house, a temporary amusement." Ruth gripped the tray tighter, her fingers trembling against the porcelain. "I'm here to do a job, sir. Excuse me." "The boss has a weakness for broken things," Junho whispered, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "But broken things are eventually thrown away. Do not get comfortable, outsider." He brushed past her, his shoulder checking hers hard enough to make the milk slosh over the rim. Ruth took a steadying breath, swallowed her fear, and hurried toward the nursery. Inside, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The nursery was the only room in the house that felt alive, though it was currently filled with the tension of a standoff. 2 other housekeepers stood by the crib, holding a bowl of rice porridge, looking helpless. Min Si sat in the center of the mattress. Her knees pulled to her chest, her lips pressed into a stubborn, pale line. She hadn't eaten since morning. The moment Ruth crossed the threshold, the air changed. Min Seo's head snapped up, the defensive curl of her small body unspooled. Ruth set the milk down and took the bowl from the relieved housekeeper. She didn't speak. She simply sat on the edge of the bed and held out a spoonful. Min Seo didn't hesitate. She opened her mouth, eating ravenously, her eyes never leaving Ruth's face, as if checking to make sure she wouldn't vanish between bites. From the doorway, unnoticed by the staff, Seung-min watched. He had seen the best child psychologists in Korea fail to get her to sleep without sedatives. He had seen nannies beg for resignation after days of hunger strikes. Yet this woman, this stranger with the terrified eyes, had bypassed the trauma triggers entirely. It wasn't just affection. It was a biological tether. As Min Seo finished the bowl and immediately curled into Ruth's side to sleep, Seung-min realized the power dynamic had shifted. Ruth wasn't just an employee anymore. She was the oxygen his daughter needed to breathe. The silence of the penthouse at 3:00 a.m. was heavier than the darkness. Unable to sleep, Ruth padded barefoot toward the kitchen, the marble floor cool against her skin. She needed water to wash down the anxiety that had lodged in her throat since her run-in with Junho. She pushed open the kitchen door and froze. Seung-min was standing by the panoramic window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He wasn't wearing his suit. He wasn't wearing a shirt at all. For the first time, Ruth saw why they called him the Ink Demon. The art was a masterpiece of violence. Dark, coiling dragons and crashing waves of black ink consumed his back, climbing over his shoulders and wrapping around his ribs like a cage. The tattoos were terrifying, meant to intimidate rivals and signal a rank that was bathed in blood. But as he turned to face her, the moonlight caught something else, something the ink couldn't hide. Among the meticulously crafted dragons were jagged, ugly ridges of raised flesh, burned scars. They ravaged his left side and marred the hand holding the glass. Seung-min stiffened, his muscles tensing as if he expected her to scream or flee. "Go back to bed, Ruth." She didn't move. She didn't run. Instead, she took a step closer, her eyes locked not on the terrifying tattoos, but on the ruined skin of his hand. It was the hand of a man who had reached into a fire. "The fire," she whispered, the realization hitting her. "The one that killed your wife." Seung-min set the glass down with a heavy thud. "It didn't kill her fast enough. I pulled her out, but she was already gone. This is what was left of me." He lifted his scarred hand, a challenge. "Ugly, isn't it? A monster's skin." Ruth closed the distance between them. Before she could second-guess her own boldness, she reached out. Her fingertips, rough from years of waitressing, grazed the angry, knotted scar tissue on his knuckles. Seung-min flinched, his breath hitching in the silent room. No one touched him without permission. No one touched him with gentleness. "It's not ugly," Ruth said softly, her voice trembling but certain. "It's proof that you tried, it's love." She looked up, meeting his intense gaze. "I watched my parents fade away in hospital beds. I held their hands until they were cold. I know what it's like to be the one left behind, Seung-min, to feel like the survival is the punishment." The use of his first name hung in the air, unauthorized and intimate. Seung-min looked down at her hand covering his scarred fist. The monster in him wanted to push her away, to maintain the distance that kept him safe. But the man in him, the one who had been grieving in silence for 2 years, leaned imperceptibly into her touch. "You shouldn't be here, Ruth," he murmured, the threat gone from his voice. "Neither should you," she replied, not letting go. "But we are." The crash was the sound of their fragile peace shattering. One moment, the nursery was filled with the soft hum of a lullaby. The next, a jagged hole gaped in the reinforced glass, wind howling through the breach. A brick, wrapped in coarse twine and a darker message, lay on the plush carpet just inches from where Min Seo had been playing. Seung-min didn't yell. He didn't panic. He went deathly still, a reaction that was infinitely more terrifying. He scooped Min Seo up, passed her to a trembling bodyguard, and grabbed Ruth by the wrist, dragging her into the sanctuary of his private study. He slammed the heavy oak doors and locked them. The room smelled of old paper and suppressed rage. "Junho is escalating," Seung-min said, his voice dropping to a gravelly octave. He paced behind his desk, running a hand through his hair. "He knows the staff is loyal to me, so he is bypassing them. He's targeting you directly. That brick was a warning shot. Next time it will be a bullet." Ruth hugged her arms to her chest, still shaking from the sound of the glass exploding. "I'll pack my things, if I leave." "If you leave, Min Seo stops speaking. She stops eating. She dies a slow death of silence." Seung-min cut her off, turning to face her. "And you think Junho will let you live just because you quit. You are a loose end. You carry the heir's blood. He will hunt you down in Chicago, in Seoul, wherever you hide. Ruth sank into the leather chair opposite his desk, the air leaving her lungs. Then what do I do? I'm just a waitress, Seung-min. I can't fight a war. No, you can't, but a matriarch can. Seung-min placed both hands on the desk, leaning forward until his shadow fell over her. The intensity in his eyes burned. Junho attacks you because he sees you as disposable, a hired help, a weakness. We must change your value on the board. We must make you untouchable. He opened a drawer and pulled out a document, sliding it across the mahogany surface. It wasn't a termination notice. It was a prenuptial agreement. Marry me, he commanded. Ruth stared at him, her mouth parting in shock. What? Not for love, Seung-min said sharply, his eyes hard and pragmatic. For survival. If you are my wife, you are part of the Jindal bloodline. To touch you would be an act of war against the entire syndicate. Even Junho cannot strike the wife of the boss without signing his own death warrant. You want to fake a marriage? I want to build a fortress, he corrected. You give Min Seo a mother. I give you the weight of my name as a shield. We live as we do now, but to the world, you are mine. Ruth looked at the paper, then at the door leading back to the nursery, where a terrified little girl was waiting. She thought of the scar on Seung-min's hand and the desperation in Min Seo's grip. She picked up the pen. Her hand trembled, but her voice was steady. Where do I sign? The transformation was absolute. The exclusive Gangnam boutique had been closed to the public, turning the fitting room into a private armory of silk and chiffon. Ruth stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back. Gone was the weary waitress in the stained apron. In her place stood the wife of the Iron Lotus, draped in a gown of midnight blue that hugged her curves and flowed like water around her feet. Beside her, Min Seo clapped her hands, a rare, silent giggle shaking her small shoulders. The toddler was dressed in a miniature version of Ruth's gown, a matching ribbon tied in her hair. They looked like a set, a mother and daughter bound not just by blood, but by the visual declaration of the Choi legacy. When Ruth stepped out, Seung-min stopped checking his watch. He stood motionless near the entrance, his dark eyes sweeping over her with an intensity that made the air in the room thin. He didn't offer a compliment. Men like him didn't deal in flattery, but the way his gaze lingered on her neck, where his grandmother's emerald pendant now rested, spoke volumes. We are late, he said, his voice rougher than usual. He offered his arm, the scarred hand hidden beneath a leather glove. Stay close to me. Today the city sees you. Their destination was the Bonjunsa Temple, a sprawling complex of peace nestled in the heart of the chaotic city. It was a traditional visit to pay respects to his ancestors, a public cementing of their union. The air smelled of pine and burning incense, the chanting of monks providing a rhythmic backdrop to the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. For a fleeting moment, as they walked up the stone steps with Min Seo between them holding both their hands, Ruth forgot the contract. She forgot the danger. She felt the warmth of Seung-min's solid presence and the small, trusting grip of her daughter. It felt real. It felt like a life she could have had in a kinder world. Then, a pigeon took flight from a stone lantern, startling her. Seung-min's head snapped up. His instincts hunting in on a glint of light from a high-rise, scaffolding half a mile away. The crack of the rifle was a dry, ugly sound that tore through the temple's serenity. Ruth didn't have time to scream. Before the sound even registered fully in her brain, a heavy weight slammed into her. Seung-min didn't dive for cover. He dove for her. He tackled her to the stone pavement, curling his massive frame around her and Min Seo, turning his back into a human shield against the unseen shooter. Stay down, he roared, the command vibrating against her chest. Stone chips exploded inches from her face where the bullet had struck. Pressed into the gravel, pinned beneath the heat of the man who had bought her life, Ruth realized with terrifying clarity, he wasn't just protecting an asset. He was protecting his world. The safe house was a concrete box buried deep in the industrial district of Incheon, smelling of damp earth and neglect. It was a stark contrast to the penthouse, but it had the one thing money couldn't buy in the city center: invisibility. Rain hammered against the reinforced steel shutters, a relentless rhythm that matched the adrenaline still coursing through Ruth's veins. Min Seo was finally asleep on a cot in the corner, clutching her rabbit with white-knuckled intensity. Ruth watched her for a moment, brushing a stray hair from the child's forehead before turning to the center of the room. Seung-min sat at a rusted metal table, the glow of a laptop screen illuminating the sharp angles of his face. He had ripped off his tie and unbuttoned his collar, exposing the dark ink that seemed to pulse with his agitation. He hadn't spoken since they barricaded the door. He was hunting. "Tell me," Ruth said, her voice cutting through the hum of the hard drive. "Don't protect me. Tell me what you found." Seung-min didn't look up. He rotated the laptop toward her. On the screen was a decrypted thread of messages and a scanned bank transfer. The dates aligned perfectly with two events: the day Ruth's eggs were discarded and the night Seung-min's house burned down. "It wasn't a rival gang," Seung-min said, the words dragging out of him like broken glass. "And it wasn't an accident at the clinic. It was Jun-ho, all of it." Ruth stared at the screen, the text blurring as tears gathered. "He sold me. He sold my daughter to you. He orchestrated the sale to bind me to the clinic's blackmail, and then, when my wife began to ask questions about Min Seo's heritage, he lit the match." Seung-min slammed his fist onto the table, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "He killed her. He silenced my daughter, and today he tried to put a bullet in you because you are the living proof of his treason." The weight of the betrayal was suffocating. Jun-ho, the man who had stood at Seung-min's right hand, had been carving away his life piece by piece for years. Ruth walked around the table. The fear that had paralyzed her at the temple was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger and a profound sorrow for the man sitting before her. He looked destroyed. The invincible Iron Lotus was hunched over, his head in his hands, crushed by the guilt of letting the wolf into the fold. "Seung-min," she whispered. "Don't," he rasped, refusing to look at her. "Do not look at me with pity. I am the reason you were almost killed today. I am the reason your life is a ruin. You should hate me." "I don't hate you." "You should." He stood up abruptly, the chair screeching against the concrete. He turned on her, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and dark. "I am a monster, Ruth. I am death walking. Everyone I touch burns, my wife, my daughter, and now you." He backed her up against the cold concrete wall, not to threaten, but to make her see. He loomed over her, using his size, his scars, his terrifying aura to try and scare her away. "Look at me. This is what you married. A butcher who couldn't even see the knife in his own back." Ruth didn't flinch. She saw the self-hatred warring with the desperate need for absolution. She reached up, placing both hands on his face, forcing him to look at her. "I see you," she said firmly. "I see the man who dove onto gravel to cover my body. I see the father who would burn the world down for a little girl who can't speak. You aren't a monster, Seung-min. You're just a man who has been bleeding for a long time." Seung-min froze. Her hands were warm against his cold skin. For years, he had been touched only in violence or in transaction. No one had held him like this, like he was something precious, something worth saving. The air in the room shifted, thickening with a tension that had nothing to do with danger. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, searching for permission or perhaps for sanity. "Ruth," he groaned, a warning and a plea. "I'm not afraid of the ink," she whispered, echoing the words she had said in the kitchen, but this time the distance was gone. "And I'm not afraid of you." He broke. Seung-min crashed his mouth down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was a collision of survival. It tasted of rain, whiskey, and desperation. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was the only air left in the universe. Ruth gasped, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer, anchoring him to the earth. His large hands spanned her waist, pulling her flush against him, the heat of his body searing through the silk of her ruined gown. The contract, the fake marriage, the strategic alliance, it all incinerated in the heat of the moment. There was no pretense here. In the shadow of death, they had found the only thing that made sense. When he finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, they were both breathless. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the chaos had settled into a terrifying, beautiful clarity. "I will kill him," Seung-min vowed against her lips, the promise vibrating through her bones. "For what he did to her, for what he did to you, I will end him." Ruth ran her thumb over the scar on his cheek. "We will end him," she corrected. "Together." The salt air at the shipping yards was thick enough to taste, a heavy mix of brine, rust, and impending violence. Fog curled around the towering stacks of shipping containers, turning the narrow alleyways into a claustrophobic maze. It was midnight, and the silence of the docks felt heavy, like a held breath. Seung-min raised a hand, signaling Ruth to stop. He pointed toward the end of the pier, where a solitary halogen light flickered, buzzing like an angry hornet. Beneath it, a figure was kneeling, hands bound behind their back. "It's Elia's," Ruth whispered, her voice cracking. Her contact, her friend, was slumped over, motionless. She surged forward, but Seung-min caught her arm. "It's too open," he murmured, his eyes scanning the deep shadows between the containers. "It's a kill box." "I can't leave him," Ruth hissed, pulling away. She didn't have to. Before she could take 2 steps, the floodlights atop the cranes slammed on, blinding them with a wash of stark, white brilliance. Long shadows stretched out from behind the containers, and the sound of slow, mocking applause echoed off the metal walls. "I told you she would come," a voice called out. Junho stepped into the light, wearing a pristine suit that looked jarringly out of place amidst the grime of the docks. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You were always predictable, Ruth, and you, Seung-min, I expected better." "Let him go, Junho," Seung-min said, his voice low and dangerous. He stepped in front of Ruth and Min-seo, shifting his stance. "The time for negotiation is over." Junho snapped his fingers. 4 men emerged from the darkness, wielding lengths of pipe and batons. They rushed in a coordinated wave. Seung-min didn't wait for them to reach him. He exploded into motion, meeting the first attacker with a brutal clothesline that sent the man spinning to the concrete. The melee was chaotic. Seung-min was a whirlwind of precision violence, ducking under a swinging pipe to drive his knee into a ribcage, then pivoting to kick another man back into the corrugated steel of a container. The hollow boom of the impact rang out like a gong. Ruth tried to pull Min-seo toward the safety of a forklift, but Junho had anticipated the move. He bypassed the brawl, moving with the predatory grace of a man who had been waiting for this moment. "Ruth!" Min-seo screamed, the sound tearing through the clamor of the fight. Ruth spun around, but she was too slow. Junho grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back, and wrapped a forearm around her throat. He dragged her backward, lifting a pistol to her temple. "Stop," Junho roared, "or I paint the docks with her." Seung-min froze, his fist inches from a henchman's face. He breathed heavily, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. The dock fell silent, save for the distant lap of water against the pilings, and Min-seo's terrified sobbing. "Drop it," Junho sneered, tightening his grip on Ruth's windpipe. "Look at you, protecting a traitor's daughter and a washed-up spy. You chose the wrong side, brother." Ruth clawed at Junho's arm, her vision spotting. She saw Seung-min's eyes, helpless, furious. She heard Min-seo crying for her. The fear that had gripped her all night suddenly crystallized into a cold, hard rage. She wasn't going to die here, not like this. She stopped struggling. Junho, sensing her surrender, relaxed his grip just a fraction to gloat. "Now." Ruth threw her head back, with every ounce of strength she possessed. Her skull collided with Junho's nose with a sickening crunch. Junho howled, staggering back as blood gushed down his face, his aim faltering. "Seung-min," Ruth shouted, dropping to the ground. Seung-min didn't hesitate. He launched himself over the gap between them, a blur of kinetic energy. Before Junho could relevel his weapon, Seung-min was inside his guard. He trapped the gun hand, twisting it until the weapon skittered across the pavement and drove his fist into Junho's solar plexus. As Junho doubled over, gasping for air, Seung-min grabbed him by the lapels. The betrayal, the chase, the danger to Min-seo, it all culminated in one final motion. Seung-min delivered a devastating roundhouse kick to the side of Junho's head. The traitor crumpled to the ground and didn't move. Seung-min stood over him, chest heaving, his silhouette framed by the harsh dock lights. It was over. The morning sun didn't assault the room. It spilled across the hardwood floors like liquid gold, warm and lazy. It was a Sunday, months removed from the cold, metallic bite of the shipping yards, and the house felt entirely different. The silence that filled the hallways wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind that precedes a storm. It was the comfortable quiet of a home that was simply resting. Ruth stood at the kitchen island, but she wasn't scrubbing it. There was no stiff black dress, no starched white apron tying her to a life of servitude. Instead, she wore a soft, oversized cashmere cardigan and jeans, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She held a ceramic mug of tea, warming her hands against it, looking out at the garden where the frost was just beginning to melt off the hydrangeas. She turned as the sound of small, thumping footsteps echoed down the stairs. It wasn't the frantic running of a frightened child anymore. It was the confident stampede of a girl who knew she was safe. "Ruth," Mincio burst into the kitchen, holding a drawing aloft. "Look, I drew the big tree outside." Ruth set her mug down, a genuine smile softening her face. It wasn't the polite, deferential smile of the maid she used to be. It was the smile of a woman who was loved. "Let me see," she said, leaning down. "Oh, Mincio, the colors are perfect. Is that a bird in the branches?" "It's a blue jay," Mincio declared proudly, climbing onto one of the bar stools without hesitation. "And he's singing. Can we put it on the fridge?" "We certainly can," Ruth said, reaching for a magnet. The change in the girl was the most profound victory of them all. Gone were the monosyllabic whispers and the haunted eyes that constantly darted toward the exits. Mincio spoke in full, vibrant paragraphs now, her voice reclaiming the space that fear had once stolen. She demanded strawberry jam for her toast and negotiated for extra screen time with the stubbornness of a normal, happy 7-year-old. From the doorway, Seung-min watched them. He hadn't made a sound entering the room, old habits died hard, but the tension that used to coil in his shoulders was gone. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was dressed in a simple, long-sleeved navy henley that fit loosely over his frame. The fabric completely covered his arms, hiding the intricate ink of the serpent that marked his past. The Yakuza enforcer, the weapon, the traitor, those identities felt like they belonged to a stranger from a different lifetime. He walked over to the island, picking up the coffee pot. Ruth glanced at him, her eyes bright. There was an easy understanding between them now, a bond forged in fire and solidified in the quiet peace of the aftermath. She didn't flinch when he moved close. She leaned in slightly, a subconscious gravitation. "The blue jay looks dangerous," Seung-min teased, looking at the drawing on the fridge. Mincio giggled, her mouth full of toast. "No, he's not. He's guarding the nest." Seung-min took a sip of his coffee, his eyes lingering on the girl, then moving to Ruth. "A good guard," he murmured. Ruth placed a hand over his, her fingers brushing the fabric of his sleeve where the tattoo lay hidden beneath. "The best," she said softly. The sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the air between them. There were no sirens in the distance, no impending threats, no need to run. Seung-min looked at the two of them, the woman who had found her strength and the child who had found her voice. He realized with a sudden, profound clarity that he wasn't just guarding them anymore. He was living with them. They weren't a job, they were a family. And for the first time in his life, Seung-min didn't check the exits. He just stayed. The end. Now hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more.